That's the way to do it. Look, we have the camera that we shot the movie on.
That's the one.
That's the one. See, it's not on, but
oh, that's cool.
This is all it takes.
Man.
Plus post production skills and shooting skills.
Yeah, of course. So, tell me, it's been a few weeks since we saw each other.
Are we officially starting?
Yeah, we're going.
Let's go.
So it's been a few weeks since we saw each other in Chicago for the premiere, and since then I know you've been hard at work working on a couple of follow-up projects, which we'll get to. But I want to talk about the movie that started it all, as far as we're concerned, Werewolf Ninja Philosopher. So at the Q&A that I moderated, you explained the origin of where the idea came from and everything. But this is for a different audience, a wider audience. Tell me how it all came about.
There was a movie called Date Number One that I made in Maryland when I lived in Maryland, D.C. area. It had a ninja that went on a blind date. That was one of the stories. The movie was made up of like 4 different stories, and then I worked on Matt Soller-Seitz's movie Space Rabbit, a project that he's working on finishing up now, and we had some bizarre puppet sci-fi characters there, and I thought that was interesting, whimsical, using animals and puppets. I was like, hey, I should make a fun project like this. And that was the werewolf. I came from seeing some of the designs. There was a lion that looked like werewolf a little. And then the ninja came from the Ninja Project. And then I did a movie called Breakthrough Weekend that had a private detective as a philosopher. And I think that's how the 3 ideas came together. And then I wanted to make something like early Jim Jarmusch, like A Stranger Than Paradise, deadpan movie, black and white, and all those ideas came together. The werewolf seemed like a good character to explore lots of ideas that we haven't yet explored in story 1, but they're on paper, on what it means to be human, to be also be a celebrity who's non-human, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that was one of the things that struck me about the movie is, you might go in expecting an origin story or something. This is firmly in the middle of Werewolf Ninja Philosopher's story. There's sort of these offhanded references to he's been around and been so famous for so long that people don't even really notice him anymore.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's, did you map out his whole grand story and then just decided to jump in the middle, or did you just start from the middle and now you have to figure out where it all came from?
No, I have a whole grand story mapped out. But the middle, given the ultra low budget status of the project, the middle one to make it as a low key deadpan black and white comedy seemed like, and also the story is about filmmakers getting killed. So that's, a movie about movies shot in a very cinematic style, a recognizable cinematic style. Seemed like a good, fun, easy way to enter into the werewolf movies. But yeah, no, he has a story as a human, how he turned into a werewolf, how he saved the city of New York from a ninja organization that was trying to take it over, how he became famous. And there's multiple other adventures. So I think I'm gonna alternate between regular world stories and werewolf stories. Like the next one I'm making is called Slow Romance. It's firmly rooted in real life, but it's still in the werewolf universe. It may not be, the werewolf may not be mentioned, but it's not a werewolf movie, obviously. Then the next one after that is The Werewolf 2.
Okay. So tell me, how did you get interested in slow cinema as the genre that you want to work in? I mean, obviously, we talked about this a bit on the last episode we did together, where you showed me the Paul Schrader the diagram, right?
Right.
But I don't think
Just
we really
learned about
talked.
it recently.
I'm sorry.
That chart I just heard about maybe just a few months ago.
Okay, but you were familiar with the genre of slow cinema. So what attracted you to working in that as opposed to, say, just traditional storytelling, or even just going for the big blockbuster system? Why slow cinema?
So I started off doing like my first movie, uh, Wild Diner was the first feature short film, and before that, a short film that was shot in Chicago called Fresh Coffee. That was 15 mil black and white. That was just more of a regular paced, regular type drama about a painter who's dying from AIDS, his girlfriend remembering him and using the paintings as one of the visual elements. Then Wild Diner was more of that was a weird movie. No, I mean, we shot a feature in one day in a living room that was turned into a diner set, punctuated with 10 or 20 minutes of the camera wandering around Washington, D.C. in between segments. So it was, yeah, the DP who shot it is a famous cinematographer now, but that was his first gig off the record.
All right.
But so then I discovered Jim Jarmusch. So then I discovered Love Diaz, lots of other slow cinema, quote unquote slow cinema filmmakers. I think that style is good for deadpan humor, and also just to take, if you shoot something in that style with the right elements, any ordinary space or event can be turned into an absurd situation. As in, why are we looking at this for such a long time? It already, the way it's presented is absurd to begin with.
So it's funny because after we talked about this and after I was exposed to Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, I started noticing that a lot of the movies that I was watching had elements of slow cinema in them, or just it took the time to slow down, like Tenebrae from Dario Argento, or even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There are just these kind of languid stretches of, say, Brad Pitt just driving around, or in Tenebrae, there's a really long shot going over around a house and into, I think the killer's lair or something like that. But I don't know if that counts as slow cinema or if that's just elements of it. What are the tenets of slow cinema? Does it have definable boundaries?
So all that stuff is connected because the slow steady shots, taking time to tell the story, that's like a art house, international slash indie cinema staple from starting in like the 80s. Tarkovsky, Jim Jarmusch, obviously. About Schmidt did a little bit of that. I mean, Tarantino obviously knows about it, and he used a similar style in Pulp Fiction. But it was definitely noticeable in Once Upon a Time in America. There was a lot of, it wasn't as tightly scripted, tightly enacted as Pulp Fiction, for example. So it was more languid. So that slow cinema style is a part of the art house style, international art house style. And what was your question?
I guess are there defining are there defining characteristics where you could look at a movie and say this is slow cinema versus this is just something that has slow cinema elements?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Love Diaz movies, he makes, I don't know, have you heard of him, Love Diaz? Filipino.
I think you mentioned him to me.
Yeah, he makes black and white movies that are 4 hours to 8 hours, sometimes longer. Those are his regular movies, and he's made like a dozen of those movies, and he's like a star in the film world. Did he win? Go ahead.
He would be outside the Tarkovsky ring, right?
He would be outside the Tarkovsky ring, but he has fans, and he has institutional support. He has festival support. So that's an extreme, clear, slow cinema, right? Then I think something that's more mainstream accessible is a lot of the Jarmusch movies. If you are taking your time and to show a scene, it's not tightly cut. I mean, as few cuts as possible. That is, that I mean, there's a sort of a intellectual and spiritual angle to slow cinema, right? Uh, uh, when I first saw it, I thought of Buddhism, right? Buddhism works on observing your thoughts, observing your uh, breathing for meditation. And it's really about the idea is to observe the universe and existence in such a way that you get to the truth of it, right? So slow cinema does kind of the same thing. I mean, you could say anything is truth, but in cinema, but in slow cinema movies or just slow movies to begin with, the camera's sort of detached. It's not entirely with the characters. As an action movie, the camera's with the characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
A hammer's kind of like the part of the team going with it. In slow cinema movies, there's like the presence of a detached observer, and that makes it more of a philosophical, intellectual process where you're watching a story, but you have space to think about what are you watching, why is it presented this way, and how do you feel about this, and how do you feel about your reaction to it. So it's more, so it slows things down for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I would say, other than the film being slow, those elements have to be present for me for it to be a slow cinema movie.
Okay.
Or as Paul Schrader says, it's transcendental cinema, which is cinema with a spiritual element to it. I mean, he's the person who coined that term. Slow cinema is a recent term that a lot of people don't even accept, but we know what people mean when they say slow cinema. It's all of those things: Jarmusch, Lev Diaz, Tarkovsky, Paul Schrader, that whole way of working, and also Werewolf now.
Well, I mean, I can understand that to a certain extent because when people are just talking about movies and they describe something as being slow, it's like a derogatory term, like a pejorative. So I can see how slow cinema might sound like a negative. Transcendental sounds much loftier and like something you have to get into. You have to get on the wavelength, kind of. But I think slow, from my limited experience, is accurate, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Plus, it's a lot easier to say than transcendental cinema.
That's right.
You know?
It takes more to define that term.
Yeah. So, in terms of putting together Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, just writing it, how did you write it? More specifically, I mean, you talked about how you had this kind of a backstory for the character and everything, but the thing that was more fascinating to me as a viewer were these little interstitials of him sitting at his kitchen table talking into his phone, ostensibly trying to solve the case, but really just talking to himself about what he believes and how he thinks about life, and it sort of wraps around the case, but then doesn't. It's not. I mean, it's funny, but it's also very well thought out, like big thoughts. I mean, you could write papers on basically any of these little scenes.
You should write a book about it.
There you go. So when you were coming up with this, was that the hardest stuff to write, or perhaps the easiest?
So one of the things I do is I write every day, and I collect notes every day. I've gotten in the habit of sometimes sharing some of that stuff on Twitter, but I'm trying not to. Trying to type it up for myself, trying not to respond to things. So when I put together, so I have hundreds, if not thousands, of things that are written down over the decades that could work in a movie. So when I'm putting together a movie, obviously I write new stuff because for the immediate present. Then I go through and pull in other things. So a lot of those ideas are ideas that I've collected over the years, turned into something that's appropriate for the werewolf character. Funny, bizarre, but kind of vaguely related to the crime that he's trying to solve, and just him being philosophical. I wanted to show the philosophical side. We see the detective side, we see he's a werewolf, we see a tiny bit of the ninja side, but the philosophical side was very important for me to establish because that's a new kind of a werewolf that we haven't seen before. I don't think there's been another philosophical werewolf.
I don't think there has been either. But you collect these sort of pieces of your consciousness over the years and then find a way to work them into the story. Now, do you find that when you go back through these ideas that you've collected, that you found that your outlook has changed? Have you been challenged by something you wrote 5 years ago? Like you pull out like, oh, this might be good for the werewolf character. Oh, wait, that I don't believe that anymore, or I really have to reshape or rethink about that.
For much of the 92 to 2019 series phase, the outlook hasn't changed that much. There are gradual changes. I mean, not epic changes, but now in the 2019, especially right now period, I am seeing a big shift in being able to incorporate more of the world and American experience into, the kind of things I'm writing. Previously, it was just DC focused, New York focused, and the older I get, the more connections I can make between like all kinds of groups of people, all kinds of countries, all historical events. I mean, lots of historical events. Whereas when I was younger, they seemed drastically different. Like New York is not Chicago. No, or New York is not, or ancient Rome is not, modern day Canada, right? That's how it looks to most people. But the older I've gotten and the more I've thought about it, there are vast, vast similarities. We might actually be looking at everything wrong when we see the similarities might be so vast that just in order to function on an everyday basis and get things done, our brains may be focused heavily on the small differences. Whereas to us, it looks like the differences are massive. But if you pull back and look beyond that, 99% of the things are similar. And then people are just incredibly engaged with the 1% that's different. Anyway, the point is now I see a big difference in thinking, whereas previously was more narrow. But before we forget, I wanted to, you responded the most eloquently and strongly to the philosophical content. So at some point you should talk about why you responded so, how you responded to the movie and why it connected with you so much. Because that's interesting because other people liked that stuff a lot, but no one has had sort of the background to talk about it. So.
Well, I don't know that I've got the background to talk about it.
Film background, at least.
Oh, sure. I think what surprised me the most was, when you hear Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, you almost think that each of those could be a gag element in this movie. But you take the character so seriously, even though he's in an absurd kind of situation, that you really dig into these elements. You don't just have him quoting Socrates or something like that. He's sitting there working things out as a deep thinker, and we're going on that journey with him. Now, he does ask, when he's talking to the detective in the first scene, if the killer of the indie filmmakers could be a 6'8" man of Korean descent or something like that, and that is kind of strange. But you get the feeling that right before we enter that scene, he might have been talking out something that would have led him to that conclusion. And I could be wrong here, but I feel like that he might be sussing out the killer from like 3 movies from now. he figured out the wrong case, just because he's so tuned into the universe or whatever. But I just really like that the idea of him talking things out, talking about, say, the relationship. It's been a few weeks since I watched the movie, but talking about the relationship of, like independent filmmakers or independent artists with greater society, and have there been other cases of indie filmmakers being killed by society? It just taking these ideas, sort of like what you were just saying, these themes that seem, kind of inconsequential or maybe even too big to handle in modern times. If you look at the wide tapestry of history, you can see patterns emerging. It's almost like being on page 5 of a 300-page story, and you're one of the characters in that story. Mm-hmm. You have no idea that there's a grand plan going on. And not to necessarily rope in the idea of God, but I mean, you can look at human history and see things kind of repeating themselves, and you could ascribe that to human nature, or maybe there is a grand plot that everything's just on repeat. It could be the simulation theory.
Well, I'll say something shocking and interesting. I'm 100% secular atheist, blah blah blah. But the universe is a vast mystery. A god is not beyond the realm of possibilities. I mean, it could be one of a million. I mean, the actual universe, we have no idea, and we don't even until only very recently have we started exploring who or what created it, how does it work, what does it all mean, why does it even exist, right? So a god or the god or gods could entirely be possible. This could all be a dream world. This could be someone's, simulation, which is another way of saying it's a godlike, it's the product of a godlike being, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, yeah, I would not be shocked if some giant dude shows up and says, "Oh, by the way, I made this little experiment. I'd like to introduce myself to you." I'd be like, "All right, what's up, creator dude?"
Well, that goes back to some of the things I've been thinking about. I listen to a lot of like YouTube videos and things like that, and people talking about random things. And part of this simulation, one of the simulation theories, is that what we know as contemporary man, we are advancing so much in terms of technology and beginning to dabble in artificial intelligence that it is theoretically possible that someday we could create a fully independent artificial being that thinks it's real. And if that's possible, then it's also possible that that was what made us. So our entire reality and perception of things, going about things, I mean, we could be what we consider real life versions of The Sims. There could be people playing us because the technology, or whatever you want to call it, is so advanced that it made us. And part of, one of our inhibiting boundaries is we can't perceive of certain things. Like we can't conceive of what was there before time, or what was there before the universe. Our perception of God is that it was always there. Well, what does that even mean? There's certain limits to what the human brain can imagine and can conceive of, and that might be at the moment, but it could be that we're never meant to figure that out, because that's sort of the boundaries of the technology, like the inhibiting chips that are put in so that we don't figure out that there was something that made us. Like Pac-Man is never going to jump out of the screen and say, "Hey, what are you doing with that controller thing?" He's just always going to be running around the maze.
Well, Pac-Man doesn't have the sense of consciousness we have. So I think we're a unique type of beings in the universe. I mean, if you look at the world, right, the human consciousness and human level of intelligence is not needed to survive on this planet and thrive on this planet. Every other type of animals are doing it really well without our level of, crazy comparatively level of intelligence, right? So we're definitely something else. If we program Pac-Man to ask, "Why do I exist?" then that's the kind of creature we are, right? So if it ends up we are created, then whoever created us is putting us on a path to figure out why we exist, or why we came into existence. That may not be the case. It just might be just the most efficient way to organize a certain kind of an animal that naturally evolved, and to the point, or the human consciousness could be an accident that turned out to be an evolutionary advantage, and that's why we have it. Another theory I have is perhaps the universe needs to be stabilized, right? Universes come into being, they collapse billions of years later. Kind of a species like humans, where we build things and we alter nature. Not us, our descendants millions of years from now, may be able to stabilize the universe so that it doesn't collapse.
That's entirely possible. And that brings to mind the question of, is it happenstance that we were created with this ability to someday save the universe? Yeah. Was that a conscious thing? Was that an evolutionary thing that was put into place by the universe as sort of this living organism that's creating its own immune system? over millions or billions of years.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of the idea of the ant and the cell phone. An ant, if you leave a cell phone out on a picnic table and an ant walks over it, the ant has no idea of what it's actually walking on. You
Mm-hmm.
can't explain what a phone is to an ant. You can't explain the internet or people in other countries or that kind of a thing. So there is this greater universe that is going on around the ant that is affecting the ant's environment and perhaps its life, but it doesn't have the capacity to understand that. It just knows that it is born, it does work for the colony, and then it dies.
Yeah, but humans have never been like that. We've been questioning our existence and creating gods and mythology to justify it and further figure it out and make deals with the devils,
Oh,
etc. We're unlike the ant. We're something super unique.
well, I agree, but even the ant is a higher functioning organism than, say, an
Sure.
amoeba, right?
Yeah.
So it's possible that whatever is surrounding us that we can't even perceive. I mean,
Right.
the ant can
Scale.
perceive the phone as
Scale.
something it's walking over,
Yeah.
but it could never have a conversation with us. So if we were in some kind of an intergalactic petting zoo and we're being observed or whatever and allowed to run around like an oversized ant colony,
Yeah.
we might just never know. There could be a purpose, there could be no purpose. And that,
Well,
but getting back to
sure.
the movie
But,
and
let me add one thing.
yeah.
The situation, if this were a movie, looks highly suspicious, right? One planet, one type of beings with super intelligence compared to all other types of beings on that planet, vast universe, no other life on the universe. It looks like a setup. I mean, if a movie opened and you saw those elements, you would be like, oh, it's a setup. The odds are so heavy. It's like if you see, a movie opens in a vast desert and then a vast forest, and then like two Roman soldiers are walking by with weapons. You're like, oh, this is some sort of a trap. These guys are going into some foreign land, badly equipped. Obviously, this is some weird setup. So existence as a human looks highly suspicious. It really looks like uh, it's some sort of an experiment, some sort of a unique accident. We don't know. But back to you.
Well, I mean, but that's the kind of beauty of thinking about all this is, it may be that we never find out. I mean, there's a very human centric idea to the idea that we have of life on other planets or God. It could be possible that there is a God or that there's life on other planets that is wholly unconcerned with us or doesn't even know about us. We could, going back to the ant analogy, the difference, the distance between an ant on my desk right now and an ant in Maryland might as well be the gap of all known reality and existence. They
But
would never know each other.
But they've recently they're doing tests with spooky action at a distance now, which is quantum entanglement, where I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but basically it's two particles that are billions of light years away or even millions of light years away. But when you adjust one, the other is affected. So there might be some other way that the two ends are connected. So
And
uh,
there's another possibility too.
we don't have enough information to say that if this is an accident, it's a spectacularly amazing accident. To
Mm-hmm.
me, it looks more like a deliberate thing that some forces or beings set this up. They're checking it out to see how it's going, or maybe this is a, like they say, this is an ancestral recreation, or we made some robots that can time travel. They created us, whatever. We don't know, but we should definitely keep asking. Someone or someone's will have the breakthrough answers.
Well, and that's going back to the movie. I've long believed in something I loosely call the screenplay theory of the universe, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier, being on page 5 of a 300-page story. If there is a grand plan, maybe each of our lives is being written out or plotted out by some high intelligence that can manage, thousands of years of evolution and history and billions of lives on the planet. But you look back on your life in retrospect and think, of the different plot points. I made this decision in 1992 that echoed. If I had, not taken that bus, if I stayed home, I never would have met this person who gave me a job, or met this girl who became my wife and gave me kids. I never would have met the person who shot me in the face during a liquor store holdup. That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
We don't have any perception of the importance of, time or certain events or other people in the moment. But looking back on it, it looks so deliberately planned.
Yeah, Spinoza and who's the new guy? I forget his name. Samuel Harris. To some degree, both of them say everything is predetermined. That we don't actually have free will. All existence of the universe has already happened, or it's happening simultaneously. But from our perspective, that means it's already happened, right? And the future's set, and what we think is free will is an illusion to keep us engaged in life. If we knew it wasn't free will, we'd be less interested. But who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. Or maybe we won't. I don't know.
Right. Most likely you and I won't, but the species might one day find out.
Yeah. But these are the kinds of things that I was thinking about when I'm watching Werewolf Ninja Philosopher talk into his phone. And it's the kind of detail or level of thinking that I don't get in a lot of popular entertainment. I went to see Hobbs and Shaw last week, the Fast and the Furious spinoff, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. But as far as engaging me on a higher functioning level, no, not at all.
Yeah, hopefully that's an area where myself and other indie filmmakers can compete with Hollywood, offer something entertaining that's more intellectually stimulating, whereas Hollywood can't because of the numbers that they're going after. So there is a competitive advantage to indie filmmakers developing work that is slow cinema, intelligent, that discusses certain things that Hollywood can't or won't discuss.
Now, what has your experience been with sort of mainstream filmmaking or the mainstream community or attitude? Mm-hmm. Like you're pretty much cemented in the or founded in indie filmmaking, but have you had any experience with the mainstream?
I decided to make indie films from the get-go, from like 92, because Hollywood was so closed off historically to minorities or anything that doesn't seem to make a lot of money. Even in 92, Spike Lee had just happened just a few years prior, right? Mm-hmm. 80s, within 10 years. So even now I see the other art forms, literature, music, far more evolved because individual artists, male, female, various ethnic backgrounds, have had the chance, painting, to try things out and develop the art form, right? Hollywood has, it created a thing that makes a lot of money, then it tries to control it as much as possible, and plus racism and sexism for the first 100 years kept minorities and women sort of out of Hollywood. Even now, I mean, it's tough for everyone. I mean, if you're a white male, you're competing against 10 million white males. If you're non-white, then you're competing against, it's a big wacky thing. I think satisfaction as an artist may be difficult to come by if the only thing you're trying to do is make Hollywood movies. So that's why I chose indie film as the way to go. I can make my movies, I can show them, I can build a fan base, push certain ideas. It seems like a good way to live. So far, that's how it's worked out. I mean, I worked for clients for Discovery Channel, I worked on other people's more mainstream projects. But for me, I think film as art is the way to go for the future. I mean, Hollywood is great. Keep doing your Transformers 25. Some people get paid. It helps the economy. Some benefits, but all kinds of filmmakers who are interested in doing something new should definitely develop a indie filmmaking practice that they can completely control from production to distribution. Like, you've heard of Jonas Mekas, right? The filmmaker Jonas Mekas? Okay,
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, he just shot everything with a little camcorder for most of his life. Bolex film camera before that. He shot it in available light. He just shot his friends, and he edited these videos and footage into maybe like 20 movies, 20 features, hundreds of shorts. That's one answer. That's one way to go. Jem Cohen has done that. Kevin Joram Everson has done that. Amir Madla, who's for some reason he hasn't been discovered by. I mean, he's mentioned in Werewolf Ninja Philosopher. Iranian American filmmaker. He hasn't been discovered by the festivals or. I mean, he's kind of like me. Also, he's doing his own thing, but he should have been discovered by festivals and by programmers. And he makes unique things that no one else really makes. It's a sort of a modern version of, I mean, a side of the Iranian American story that we don't see. I mean, a lot of immigrant narratives or minority narratives. Hollywood focuses on the pain, right? Like, it's horrible, slavery times 15. This poor Indian dude who can't eat, who's good at a quiz show. I mean, it's sort of fetishizing the poverty and the struggle, but that's only a tiny fraction of the experience of every group, right? Just as there are happy, well-adjusted, successful white people, there's happy, well-adjusted, creative people from in every single background. Has always been the case. So Amir deals with not politically oppressed, Iranians, but he deals with largely people like him, creative Iranian Americans who are doing things. So he's a good filmmaker to check out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up, talking about how minorities and women were historically shut out of the mainstream art world for so long. I wonder if the reason we're seeing so many of these oppression narratives is because now that they're sort of welcome into the community and getting these big opportunities, that there's a feeling that those are the stories that need to be told.
The narratives are a function of society that has created a racial hierarchy, right? That it makes white people feel good when I mean, this is no studio will say this, but this is the origin of that, right? If you look back in history, not just white people, I mean any majority in any country, right? When they see people who are not them suffering, they're both relieved and they get a certain kind of they get to participate in the suffering and get sort of a sort of a release, saying, yeah, I'm not those people, I'm way better off, but I can connect with their suffering. That means I'm a good person. That's the underlying structure of those stories. Now, that's one thing, but individual minority filmmakers and women making stories that are about suffering, that's something else. That's just documenting an aspect of the historical existence. But if you look, I mean, if you look at why Hollywood always makes, lots of movies about slavery, when the African American experience is, incredibly rich, full of poets, painters, businessmen, businesswomen. It's because, it sort of reinforces to the majority, yeah, those people are not us. But, we can get a certain pleasure out of seeing them suffer, and, there's a joint humanity there, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, last 100 years, America coming out of slavery and segregation created work that reflects, where it was. Next 100 years will be different. And maybe in 300 years, people will be shocked that humans thought people who other humans who looked slightly different or from different areas were classified as an entirely different tribe, and they went to war with each other. It would, it's like us going to Walmart now and being able to buy everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where at one point you had to go to the meat store to get the meat. You had to go to the sugar store to get the sugar. And there were monopolies. There was economic struggle between those various people. Now we're like, whatever, man. It's just product. We're gonna, we can buy it at Walmart or Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see even in those stores, they have these, even the big box kind of like grocery stores. They've got food from all over the place.
Mhm.
Sure, it might be Americanized food or whatever, but
It's just
you can,
food now.
yeah,
It's
it's
just
just food.
food. You don't need to know the story. You
Yeah.
tell you the history or anything. You're like, oh, it tastes good. It's food. Let's eat it.
So let me ask about your story, your origin story.
Sure. Origin story of the Sujewa.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, so you were raised in Maryland.
No,
You,
I was born in Sri Lanka. They went through a 30-year-long civil war, and the two sides, to an outsider, look almost identical. The Sinhala Buddhist and the Tamil Hindus, right? The people look the same because they've lived in the same island for tens of thousands of years, immigrants from India, etc. So the cruelty of that civil war made me realize that humans are functioning under some immense delusions that sometimes go really bad, really, take a really dark turn. So I think that experience, observing the Civil War, I mean, I was born in 72. The Civil War started in 83. I moved to the US in the 84, 85. So I've just been a distant observer, but the horrible things, I mean, it's like the Northern Ireland problems or any civil war. Horrible things were done by both sides all the way to the bitter end.
sure.
So, but these are like relatives. These are people, those two groups of people are the most closely connected uh, groups of people in the entire world, right? So, so such two groups can do these horrible things under, there were justifications, racism, colonialism, post-colonialism, self-determination, whatever the political justifications were, the murder and the rape and all the horrible things that were done to children and women and even men. Uh, when you put all that on one sheet of paper, you're like, wow, these are really deluded, violent people who did horrible things, regardless of the political goals. Then you take that and look at all of humanity. You're like, most of humanity is like this. Look at our history. We're violent people who are always doing incredibly horrible things. So that's why, to me, the slow cinema strategy of looking at humans at a remove, not fully with the characters, but looking at them with some room to think about them is a good way to approach just living in general. So so you're less likely to get swept away by all the ways that our thinking can go wrong.
So you moved here you moved to America when you were 9. Is that
No, it
right?
was 12. Yeah,
12. Okay.
12.
It's late. I can't do math.
Yeah, yeah. Math is bad.
So you came here when you were 12. What was your conception of America? I mean, did you
Well,
have
we
one
already
before you moved here? Like, what did
yeah
you see here
we
that
already
was?
America. We had American TV, and we had relatives out here, and yeah, I mean, the big in big strokes we knew, but in the smaller strokes I learned. I mean, I came at the right time. 12 is a good age to make a jump between civilizations or vastly different countries. Then I grew up here and absorbed everything, but having lived in Sri Lanka and having an understanding of they have a 3,000-year written history, amazing past, amazing potential, great country. Also, a 30-year-old civil war. Think the 20 million people, they can't get along, but that's the story of the old world. This is why we're in America. everyone everyone got tired of Europe and Asia and Africa and their various problems.
Well, we certainly have our share,
We
but
have big problems here.
But I mean, like when you came here, what was your, I guess, did you have a childhood ambition to become a filmmaker or an artist?
At 18, I decided. I mean, I knew I had creative abilities and I could be a lawyer, whatever I wanted to. But the knowing that life is most likely a one-shot deal, you're only going to be alive once, that being a filmmaker seemed like the most uh, thrilling and exciting, fun thing, and maybe useful thing I could do that could help others in some way. And but I mean, the model back then was Spike Lee, Jarmusch. I mean, some of the same people as I have now. But yeah, so I thought it was a good way to lead one's life. You know, get into making movies.
Now, and the kinds of movies that you're making, I mean, I would imagine that coming from where you came from and your earlier childhood experiences, has there ever been a temptation to put that to film, to write that story and tell that story?
Eventually, maybe, but it could be told in a not in a way that is 100% representational. I mean, I don't have to go make an epic movie about the Civil War to talk about the Civil War, or I don't have to make an epic movie about the history of Sri Lanka. I could just work that into my New York stories. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in the future I will be working those things in. Um, and there are mythical creatures in ancient Indian and Sri Lankan mythology that may resemble the werewolf, right? There are beings with multiple heads, beings who are half animal, half human, super intelligent, godlike beings, etc. So yeah, I'm sure there are influences that carry over.
Um, and what you were talking about in terms of humans being a very kind of warlike species, and then you observing mankind from a different angle through the art of slow cinema, uh, that it feels like it is coming across in Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, the absurdity of of mankind, this idea that there is murder in the movie. It's kind of played for laughs, but it's also you're getting into the idea of criticism, of insecurity, of sort of internet culture without specifically calling it out. I don't want to get into spoilers, of course,
Yeah,
but it.
one interesting thing we might be able to talk about. Well, two things. One, people who actually have paid attention to real life violence. Woody Allen, I think, is one of these people. Don't really want to show violence too much in their movies. I mean, because to people who don't know violence, violence is just like a foreign, funny, weird entertainment thing, right? For people who know violence or who paid attention to a war or maybe the Holocaust, they know this is some dark stuff. This is a dark impulse of humans. We don't need to show it too much. So that's why I sort of cleverly, I think, work around showing the murders and showing the blood and stuff like that. I think I'll continue to do that. The other thing is, I've always found is fascinating the world of filmmakers and film critics, right? So I think I'm going to keep bringing that back in the next movie, Slow Cinema. No, Slow Romance, could be Slow Cinema. The two main characters who are falling in love are filmmakers in New York. They could have been saved by the werewolf, but I find that obviously we know that many people who become critics were once filmmakers or wanted to become filmmakers, but just couldn't make it because of the immense, challenge of making movies. Uh, and then, yeah, so I find that interesting that critics, they're kind of remaking the movies when they talk about it in their own way.
Well, very much so. I mean, one of the things when I'm talking about a movie on the podcast or even just with friends hanging out, a lot of the times it comes down to analyzing the stuff that worked, but also what didn't work and what we would have done if we'd been, part of the process.
Yeah,
And
like
yeah,
making it on paper.
yeah, and coming up with narratives that we think might have worked better, or imagining alternate realities where the movie played out a completely different way. So it is fun. It is a way to engage the creative process without spending years working
Right.
on making something. I think you're onto something about a lot of film critics being armchair filmmakers. But I want to ask you about you're working on a project with Matt Zoller's sites,
Yeah.
who's he's the editor of
Yeah.
RogerEbert.com. Um, has he seen Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, and what
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
he
He
make of
thought,
it?
I told him the idea when I got it. He thought it was hilarious. I mean, because we're friends and we work together, he can't really review it. Nor can he encourage or discourage people from doing it, because that's sort of blurring the lines. I mean,
Sure.
him as a critic, he has, his standards. I mean, so he can't really push it too much or, criticize it too much. So we're safe either way. But he thought the review by Michael Phillips of the Tribune was really good, and
Cool.
he thought the idea was funny, and yeah, and Matt is a sort of a unique. He's a rare example where a person could be both a filmmaker and a really good critic, right? His stuff is fun to read. Also, Richard Brody is fun to read. He was also a filmmaker, Richard Brody from The New Yorker, and what's his name? Roger Ebert was a filmmaker, but Matt's got a lot of creative ideas. He kind of got sidetracked from making movies because I mean he has a family and he has some very well established critical gigs and critical jobs. So, but he's getting back into filmmaking. He's made hundreds of, not hundreds, maybe 100, maybe at least dozens of whatchamacallit, video essays about movies, and one feature and one short, and now he's working on his Space Rabbit, which is going to be his probably second feature. Yeah.
So what you are a filmmaker. Are you able to sustain yourself by making films, or just being involved with things that are sort of film adjacent, like editing and assisting and things, or do you have like a legit day job to pay the bills?
So one way Hollywood has minimized competition is tying film productivity to money, right? So it has become the thing now. People are constantly talking about and arguing about fictitious numbers. The numbers that the studios release about what the movies make, or what Netflix does, no one really knows if those actual numbers, except for a few accountants, right? But they've created a culture of attaching a high monetary value to movies, which makes a lot of artists think, well, I'll never have access to that kind of money, so this is not a field that I should even get into. Whereas music, literature, other types of art, people can see, oh, I can afford that. I can afford to form a band, put out a record, right? So that veil is lifting. So this is one of the reasons why Hollywood is focusing on superhero movies, because with Netflix and Amazon becoming a viable distribution system, with anyone with like a little camera like this is like $1,200, right? Which is affordable for someone who's really dedicated. With a little camera like that, can shoot a movie that can play in a Chicago theater, that could get written up on the Tribune. Hollywood has is facing lots of competition for making small movies. The big things only they can do because they have the money and the stars, right? So uh, no filmmaker should look at money making plus or minus as a reason to make films or a reason not to make films. So personally, I've always worked. I've made money from making movies. I made money from sales, marketing, working on people's crowdfunding projects, whatever the case is. So to me, filmmaking and money making are on two separate tracks. I'm always going to work on my movies, make them, and get them out. Hopefully, 2 or 3 movies a year with the new system that I have set up. The bills get paid. You take on client work, you make some money from film projects, you raise money, you pay yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So no, I'm not. I don't have the two linked in the sense that a film must make this much money before I can make another film, or I need X amount of money to make a film, or I just can't make a movie. I can always make a movie, and whether it makes money or not, I have the next idea ready to go by the time the next one comes up. So I think film should be approached as sort of a mission, like art, like almost even religion, maybe. You know, monks and priests don't make a lot of money, but they go and do their thing. Soldiers don't make a lot of money, they go and do their thing. So to the sort of a middle class uh, commodification of creativity, sort of a Hollywoodization has happened, where people have Hollywood has proved, I mean, sold the idea to people that film must equal a lot of money. It doesn't have to be. It's completely unrelated. It's like film is more like poetry or any other art. Doesn't have may not doesn't necessarily have to do anything with money, but there are ways to make movies that make money as opposed to ones that don't.
Oh, sure. I'm not suggesting that you're going to be starving in the street if your movie doesn't work. I'm just wondering, like,
fine. I live in Brooklyn and I gotta lose weight.
So
no.
I'm just thinking practically, because as you say, the keys to the kingdom have been handed over to the aspirants in a lot of cases, because you can shoot a movie on your phone, or you can buy a $1,200 camera and make a movie that looks as great as Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, which seeing that at Facets, it was a completely different experience. Seeing it on the big screen, like, wow,
it looked great, right? It looked great.
It did.
Yeah.
But in terms of, say, my gig as a film critic, I have a family to support, and so I have a day job that has not any connection to film criticism. And if I didn't have that job, I don't know what what exactly I would do.
Well, historically, artists have had families and have done businesses, other things on the side, while being super productive with their art. So I think all artists, film critics included, should approach it that way. That figure out the finances. But if film criticism or filmmaking or painting, that is your main focus in life, make sure you do that, because at the end of one's life, or when your life is reviewed by someone else 300 years from now, or even 20 years after you die, no one's going to care about what bills got paid when, or how much money you made in 2017. They're going to say, wow, look at Edward Hopper's Nighthawks at the Diner. Look at that amazing piece of art. How much money did Edward Hopper make at the time? What was his private life like? What was his private finances like? No one cares, except someone who might write a forensic accounting book. So while you're alive, go for the biggest thing you can go for, the way that you want to go at it. Don't worry about the money. I mean, you have to eat, you have to pay your bills, you got to pay your taxes. You'll figure out a way.
Wow. Well,
I'm saying people use money as the reason not to do something that will completely change their lives, right? So since I chose, I mean, I'll bring it back to more, observable level. Because I chose filmmaking as a youngster, I got to make a bunch of movies, move to New York, meet a lot of interesting people, and have a really fulfilling life. Get movies made, get them fly out to Chicago, meet him, go to film festivals. So my life has turned out really well, because I decided at an early age, no matter what, I'm going to stick with the filmmaking thing, and I found a way to make it happen. I actually prefer the Jonas Mekas experience, where he was able to make a ton of work on a no budget, versus something like a Tarantino experience. He's made 9 movies in 30 years. In his space, he's a giant, right? But in his space, Jonas Mekas is also a giant. I mean, whose movies would be more influential to the future? That'll be difficult to tell. But Jonas Mekas movies are already being massively, hugely influential for historians. There's a National Gallery of Art retrospective of his movies going on right now in DC. I mean, he has footage from just his daughter running around in 1970s New York. No one has that footage. No one has sort of non-commercial poetic footage of ordinary life in the 70s shot on film. It's amazing. So money and distribution power alone may not produce the best work.
Definitely. And there's room for all of it. And what's interesting though is that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino and Warner Brothers, whoever put that out, probably spent millions of dollars trying to recreate
Right.
a period piece that someone shooting documentary footage that's well preserved from the 70s, you get that essentially for free.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, and I know we're going to talk again because I feel like there's so many different things that we could talk about.
We should do it once a month or something like that.
I'm down for it, man.
Let's do it. And we'll write down questions. I'll be driving or taking the subway more than likely and going, oh, that's something Ian wants to talk about. So let's talk about your ambitions. How did you get into film criticism, and what do you hope to do with it?
Let's save that for next time.
You are the host. We will go with your choices.
Okay, but yeah, we'll lead off with that. But I do want to talk about two things related to your recent projects. One is that Werewolf Ninja Philosopher is now available to rent on Vimeo.
Vimeo VOD. Maybe Amazon later in the year. I'm looking at some other distribution options at the moment.
Now, just briefly, what is that like? What is that process like? How do you get a film distributed?
Well, I mean, that's an ever-evolving thing for the indie filmmakers because it requires a lot of money to properly market something, to make the splash that Hollywood can make. But on the other hand, if your movie if you can sell it to 3,000 people, make $30,000, and the scale that I'm working in, that's a massive success. So indie film distribution includes submitting to festivals, which I haven't done with Werewolf because I started showing it right after it was done. But slow romance, I'll submit to. It'll become slow cinema eventually. Slow romance, I'll submit to festivals. And then after that, you submit to theaters, art houses like Facets, and there's hundreds of others, see if they want to show it. That's theatrical. After that, you can bring it out. You can work with many other distributors, or you can work. I want to develop my own brand to release my own movies, release DVD, Blu-ray, VOD, and then merchandise. So that's developing an entire marketing and sales business.
And that's got to be a whole other facet of filmmaking that you've got to learn and figure out. I mean, that's got to I imagine that takes a lot of time and research, right?
Yeah, well, I've been doing it since my first movie. The short film I finished in '92, I rented a screening room at the Kennedy Center and showed it. And my first feature, I did Four Wall. I rented a theater in Georgetown and showed it and made a little profit just for the screenings. And then some things were booked. Some things are Four Wall where I act as a distributor. I rent the space and I show it and I keep all the money or the money that doesn't come in. And but sometimes like Facets reached out to me and say, hey, I heard about this movie. Charles Coleman, great programmer, said, let me see it. He saw it. He's like, all right, I like it. I'll show it for a week. We'll split the money. I'm like, all right. So that happens. So, but if you stick with it, through trial and error, you'll figure it out. Indie musicians have had to do it, and they were able to build a thriving industry where they can play live shows, make some money, finance their activities. So indie filmmakers have to do the same.
Yeah, it's a whole business you got to navigate. And then the last thing I wanted to close on was your new project, which we've incorrectly identified as slow cinema, but it's slow romance.
Yeah, at one point it was called Slow Like Romance, but how it came about is at one point many years ago, I was showing a movie and I met this woman at a theater, and we had a little, some romantic feelings happening. And I was thinking about that. I mean, when you're showing your movies at theaters, you have lots of downtime, right? To think about the past various movies. Like, well, then I thought the werewolf style could work for a mainstream romantic comedy or mainstream accessible romantic comedy. Slow, poetic, sort of celebrating the visual beauty of things. So we're going to try that out.
And you announced earlier this week that you've cast your
Yeah.
lead actress, correct?
Yes. Kendra McNulty. I had to look at 700 or so resumes and headshots, and then I interviewed maybe 5 people out of that. I usually select actors, and this has worked out well. I look at experience and reels, then I do like a 1 or 2 hour long interview. And usually I try to keep it 1 hour. But with Kendra, we ended up hanging out for like 4 hours, and she understands what I'm trying to do, and she has a lot of good training. She went to American U and has done a lot of theater theater and other acting since she got out. So I think she'll work out really well. I have a lead actor also in mind, and a filmmaker, actor, and once the script is done, if his schedule works out and if he likes the script, we'll bring him to New York, and then we'll have that. But if he can't do it, then we'll find a local male actor. So it'll be like Before Sunrise, 2 character, 90-minute romantic comedy about 2 people meeting in New York and slowly falling in love.
So when and you said you're still casting, you're still writing it. When do you anticipate shooting it and then releasing it? Because I really want to see this.
Oh, it's coming. You'll be one of the first people to see it. You can actually, if things go well, you can write a book about it. You can start a little cottage industry of supporting Sujewa projects. You might actually make more money than the actual movies themselves. So late September, last week of September is supposed to be the audition week. First week of October is supposed to be the shoot week. So 1 week, not audition, 1 week rehearsal, 1 week shoot, and then by end of October it'll be done.
Wow. Okay.
I've worked out a system, in 2019. If you prep things properly, you can shoot a feature in a week. And I mean, not just me. Joe Swanberg has talked about this, from Chicago. Very inspiring filmmaker to many ultra low budget filmmakers. And he learned it from horror filmmakers who are making like a feature in like 4 days because they plan things out a certain way. But you saw the style of Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, so that's wide shots, a lot of things being played out without cuts. So if the actors are properly prepped, you could do that. Yeah, you could do what I'm planning in a week. Obviously, it could become a disaster, and I'll be like, all right, you got to spend 3 weeks shooting this. So it'll come out in 2020. As soon as it's done in 2019, I'll send it out to festivals. I'll send you a copy. You can take a look, and I hope to make it. I think it'll appeal to more people. 80% of the people who were interested in Werewolf were men, but for slow romance, when people submitted their cover letters, the actors and the actresses would write like 1 or 2 pages of why they want to do it. The male actors would be like, available, interested, sounds cool, let's do it. So already I'm seeing a huge interest by women in the story, because I think one of the things that I keep hearing is that technology has sped everything up, but when it comes to romance and sex relationships, this might not be the way to go. I think technology will eventually be removed from that equation. People will realize this is completely the wrong way to go about this. Like almost every woman I talk to about this project is like, yeah, I'm off Tinder, I'm off online dating, I'm trying to meet people in the real world, slowing things down.
Yeah, this is talk about things that we hope are bad memories in 300 years. I'm hoping I'm hoping this is just a blip that
yeah,
the way people talk about.
Yeah.
Huh?
historians will be like, they did what?
Yeah.
She walked on photos and went out and had sex with these people, and for a long period of time, and they became mad and committed suicide in large numbers. That's interesting.
Yeah. Whew. Well, this conversation has been interesting, and I've really enjoyed it. And this is going to be the first of many, I think, because I like this idea of doing a monthly or at least a regular conversation about just everything. So,
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
As projects get done.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck continuing on Slow Romance and Werewolf Ninja Philosopher 2.
And we're working on Werewolf 2. I hope to shoot that immediately after Slow Romance. We're developing that. Some of the actors who didn't make it into Slow Romance will end up in Werewolf Ninja Philosopher 2. I was casting both things at the same time.
And Art's coming back, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless he gets hired to do Top Gun 4, or Top Gun 3. Art is on track to come back as Werewolf again.
Excellent. He has to be.
Yeah, he's the best. For some reason, if he can't do it, then we'll find someone else, and it'll be a different experience. I was thinking of someone like, who's that actor? Jimmy Smits? Smits, right?
From NYPD Blue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a different character. I mean, each actor could create a different kind of werewolf. We'll see. But we like Art's werewolf works, so we'll stick with it for now.
Definitely. All right, man. Well, thanks again for talking to me, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. I look forward to listening to this. When it's up, let me know.
And possibly watching it. The more I enjoy talking to you and seeing you and your expressions and holding up the camera, I think this might go on YouTube. So
do YouTube. Yeah, that's a good way. I mean, you could do both. You could do Filmmax Radio does the audio portion on the podcast and then the video portion on YouTube.
Done. We're gonna do that.
Awesome.
So
yeah,
man.
All
right. Have a good night, man.
Do the fist.
Oh, fist bump. This for you, YouTube.
There we go. All right. Thanks a lot.
Good night, man.